The Watergate Scandal is one that will forever be remembered in the presidency of Richard Nixon. Some people in America cannot mention the name without thinking of such. This embarrassment on the integrity of our American government, made by a person who should be the great face of our nation, has affected the way Americans perceive our Commander-in-Chief. But that is only to the Americans who know the story. Most people know of the Watergate Scandal, or that it was something negative that happened during the time period, but not the important details. The first Watergate wiretapping began on May 28, 1972, but let's go back to the initial planning process. On January 27th, G. Gordon Liddy, the chief financial advisor to the re-election of then-President Richard Nixon, proposed a plan to illegally wiretap the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the now famous Watergate complex in Washington, D.C., which coined the term Watergate Scandal. With months of planning, these men found ways to condense their plan and make it more of a discreet operation. E. Howard Hunt and G. Gordon were the leaders in the break-ins. They wiretapped two DNC chairmen's phones, one successfully and one unsuccessfully, causing them to break in a second time, and eventually leading to them being caught and arrested on June 17, 1972. They were noticed by Watergate complex security guard Frank Willis because they had put tape over the locks of the complex door leading to the parking garage. After taking them off the first time and thinking nothing of it, he came back after a while and noticed them back on. These caused him to call the police and eventually getting them arrested. After the break-in had surfaced to the outside world, there were many attempts by the White House officials to cover up this news. Even Watergate prosecutor James Neal had stated he was convinced Nixon had no correlation with the break-in, citing a conversation with him and Nixon 5 days after the event, saying, "Who was the asshole that did that?" Nixon must have been a fantastic liar. I imagine most presidents are, but it's impressive to convince one of the lead prosecutors you have no relation to the crime. Nixon continued to lie, going on to say that no one in the White House played a role in the event. Then he convinced Chief of Staff H.R. Heldman to halt the investigation on finding where the money was funded from, leading to an investigation on the money trail. On September 29, 1972, the press reported that John Mitchell, the Attorney General, ran a secretive Republican fund that conspired against the Democratic Party gathering intelligence on the upcoming election. These came out to a totaled lump sum of $512,000, adjusted to today's inflation. Many attempts were made by Nixon to cover up the crime and make it seem like he was not involved whatsoever. But as in many cases, if you are guilty, the more you try to distance yourself from the crime, the closer you get to revealing your involvement. Nixon had convinced his two associates, Bob Heldman and John Elcherman, to resign, but mentioning in this statement that they were not involved in the scandal. After these statements were made, Senate approved a committee to investigate the Watergate scandal, and it was nationally televised from May 17th to August 7th in 1973. After the eventual release of these tapes to the Congress, it became evident to the president that he did not have the evidence or the people on his side. He had lost his argument for innocence. On August 8, 1974, from the Oval Office, President Nixon gave his resignation speech nationally televised.
Good evening. This is the 37th time I have spoken to you from this office, where so many decisions have been made that shape the history of this nation. Each time I have done so to discuss with you some matter that I believe affected the national interest. In all the decisions I have made in my public life, I have always tried to do what was best for the nation. Throughout the long and difficult period of Watergate, I have felt it was my duty to persevere, to make every possible effort to complete the term of office to which you elected me. In the past few days, however, it has become evident to me that I no longer have a strong enough political base in the Congress to justify continuing that effort.
After passing the presidency on to Gerald Ford, he was pardoned by Ford, being cleared of all charges. Richard Nixon proclaimed his innocence until his death in 1994, saying he was wrong not acting more decisively. We can learn something by this historical happening, mostly by understanding issues people struggle with every day. Be honest to your fellow person, and don't be a crook.